This is the Horse-Human Connection, a captivating podcast where we extend into the world of equine-assisted learning, horse training, and gentleness in working with these magnificent creatures. Captivating stories from the leading professionals and ordinary people alike unravel novel ideas in being with horses. The Horse-Human Connection is an idea, a place, and a voice. The idea is to support the quiet revolution and recognize the intelligence and true nature of the horse. The place is a destination farm near the Umpqua Forest and River that slows down visitors and patrons enough to experience the shift. The voice is this podcast. Welcome to today's episode.
Good morning, this is Ishi Abel with the Horse-Human Connection Matrix. And part of this matrix is the rest of wildlife. A couple weeks ago, I did an episode about being in right relationship, not just with people, but with the earth and with plants. And today I want to talk about some of that right relationship with animals and hunting. I'm going to tell you a couple of stories that were told to me by an old friend. I'm going to tell you some of my opinions. I grew up in the city. I mentioned that maybe at some point. So when I moved to Oregon and had more opportunities to be in wildlife and spend outside and in the forest and notice things, I took full advantage of that. And one of the things that I noticed was all the dead deer on the side of the road, especially in the fall. And when I first moved here, I had to reckon with a lot of different things and shifting beliefs and seeing things differently. It's one thing to hear about stuff when you live in the city, and it's another thing to experience living in a rural county and the ideas that people have and the differences. This friend told me in a conversation that her husband, who was a hunter, had told her that there were 3,000 control hunt doe permits issued for our area of town. And it's not even a city, it's just an area of town. And that blew my mind. I was like, wow, no wonder there's so many deer on the side of the road. And I started thinking about the food and the competition and the cougars and the bears that hunt the deer. And it was just, my mind was suddenly in a completely different place. So I also started noticing that spring when I rode my bike, the bones on the side of the road where the deer had been, and even the lines of powder where the bones had become powder after being there for so long, and how the turkey vultures come in and clean up the mess, and how when you drive by it does stink as it's rotting before they finish their job. So, we're all kind of predisposed to the Bambi thing, at least most of us in my generation were. And, oh, poor Bambi, his mother died, and, the evil hunters, there's some validity to that story. There's also another story of people that needed to hunt, that people who grew up in a place where hunting supplemented their groceries, like in a serious way that they needed it. What I'm trying to say is there's this full gambit of people's ideas, and some of them very strongly opinioned about hunting. And I just want to talk about that because we all have our own relationship with each other, with the earth, and certainly our judgments, our practices, and our beliefs are part of that. Now, this friend of mine, this old friend of mine, we're not going to mention names, or we'd have to change the names to protect the innocent and almost innocent in these cases. But I'd read some about Native Americans, and I'd read about when they are successful at a hunt that they put grass in the animal's mouth, if it's a grass eater, which most of what you're hunting is, and say a prayer, that this animal is giving its life so that we can have life, so that we can continue. And the spiritual aspect of that is important. It's important if you're going to take a life to eat, that you acknowledge it. And I think that's why people pray over their food, right? We're acknowledging gratitude for our place in the circle of life. And when we buy meat at the grocery store, we're so far removed from the trauma, the killing, the process, the emotions that might be present that go into that. I think everybody that's going to eat meat should experience a hunt and a kill, at least if they're not killing, at least being near the process, because it brings reverence. It brings front center in your face that, yeah, this animal is dying so that I can have animal protein. And that's important. And I know that there's some vegetarians. I recently am much more a vegetarian than I've ever been. I only eat meat about once a week. I'm enjoying on Facebook these clips of some people are hooking up microphones with electrodes to different plants where you can hear their songs and how they sing. And I've always known that plants and trees and all living things communicate. If you're a vegetarian because your body doesn't need meat, or because it makes more sense for your grocery bill or your culinary skills, that's great. But if you're a vegetarian because of poor little Bambi, I'm sorry, but you're prejudiced, because the plants have feelings and voices too. And my point is that whatever we eat, we're all here, the animals, the plants, the people, we all have to eat something. So let's just be reverent about our place. And being humans, there's nothing that's really eating us. So that puts us in a different position. But I don't believe the deer on one hand mind, because they know. The ones that are hunted with reverence know that they're part of. And I think going back to my interview with Rupert Isaacson, he talks about hunters and gatherers and the spiritual aspect of that and calling in a deer. I believe anybody can call in a deer if you have the right heart and if you put enough meditation into it. And that's what occurred to me. That's what the other day watching these hunters and I'm sorry, but a lot of times it just seems like people are doing it wrong. And I think that's part of my personality and part of the autism. We get to thinking that there's one way, and they call it black and white thinking. I'm not a black and white thinker in every regard, but a lot of things strike me that, oh, that doesn't seem right. And a lot of hunting practices don't seem right. Being in right relationship with the animals you're hunting seems more right. Maybe I can put it that way. It seems more right. So deer will circle back the way a horse will circle back. I don't know if I talked about I don't think I've actually talked about the Monty Roberts story, because I think everybody that has a horse knows who Monty Roberts was and what he did, but I still like to tell the story, and I'll tell it later. But part of that Monty Roberts horse training story and learning the language of Equus is that they circle back. They're afraid, they'll run a quarter mile, and they circle back. And we can use that in their behavior and in manipulating and training horses. The same thing is true of deer. My friend whose husband was a hunter told me about that, reading it in a magazine, a hunting magazine, that they will circle back. And in my mind, most hunters know this, but maybe they don't. Maybe they don't know that if you scare a deer, they'll circle back and see if there's still trouble. That's how a lot of hunters ambush it on the return round. So this woman that was a friend of mine, she told me these stories from her husband, right? And they were crazy. And I said, we're not talking about names because we're protecting the almost innocent here. And here I'm talking about what's right and wrong and people needing food and their different belief systems. So I think at some points, this man didn't follow all the rules. But in a way, he evened the chances for the deer. And in a way, I think he approached it with great, great reverence. So there's one story where he and his buddy were hunting and they got a deer And there wasn't a whole lot of blood. It was rather curious. It was a smaller deer. They put it in the back of the pickup, and the pickup had a shell, and the shell had a window to the cab, and the window to the cab was open. So they're driving home with this dead deer in the back, and suddenly, and it didn't have antlers, and suddenly there's a little face in between them. And the deer wasn't dead. It had only been grazed in shock. So it got up and stuck its little head right through the window, right between them. And these guys were so surprised. And, there's a lot of ways that story could have gone, right? They could have stopped and opened up the back and let the thing out. They could have had a conversation with it. I'm sure that didn't occur to them. Or they could have done what they did, and they opened up the back and they ended it for the creature. I really like it when people kill a deer and they're reverent and they put grass in the animal's mouth and they say a prayer and they acknowledge their place. There's another story that she told me where her husband had shot a deer, thought that it was down, and when he came upon it to cut the throat, the thing got up, and this one had antlers, and he grabbed the antler with knife in one hand, antler in the other, and they went around in circles, like serious circles. Like this was a big, strong man, until finally the hunter prevailed. But when I think about this story, it's comical. They're both comical, but there's an element of play, not necessarily completely fair play, but of competition. Maybe that's the best word, of a competition in a way that makes it better. I had the opportunity to talk to this hunter man at one point. He told me, I asked him questions about what he did, and while he was laying there in the pre-dawn on the damp earth, waiting for the deer, he was becoming part of the forest. Like he really embraced his camo and did the fade, and at that point, when you make it a meditation and you do this fade into the landscape, into the earth, into your place as a hunter on the earth, the joining that happens, I think, is what brings the deer. And he may have called to them. I don't know. Like I say, he had some native blood. It's that attitude. It's like when you're fishing and you're like, okay, there's a fish. There's a fish under there somewhere. Come on, fish, bite my hook. Bite the worm on my hook so I can catch you. Come on, fish, where's the fish? It's a competition in a way that is entitled. Like, fish, you need to jump on my hook. Versus, I'm hungry. I'm part of this earth. It's time for me to eat. Could I have a sacrifice? Could an animal, a fish or a deer, be my sacrifice so that I may thrive? There's a big difference. It's not an entitlement. It's an asking. It's a respectful request. And I think that's what the difference is. And I think that's what people lose sight of. The trophy hunters, the people training kids, this is what I saw, all right? There's a place I hike, and I saw, and hunters can hunt there too. And I saw this family, and this was early in the fall, and it was hot. And you could tell they'd been out there a while because they were like bundled up, but it's like 70 degrees. And this little kid, this chubby little kid is like really red cheeks, and he's got all this like gear on and the backpack and the camo coat, and he's running after the men. And none of them look very happy. And, either they'd been out there too long or they started at the wrong time or whatever. But it's very rare you're just going to shoot a deer in the middle, tromping down the trail, the three of you, in the middle of a sunny afternoon when it's 70 degrees out where other people are hiking. Like, that's probably not going to happen. Deer are way smarter than that. But it's also the attitude that struck me. Like, I don't know. I don't know for sure what the attitude was, but None of them looked happy. None of them looked purposeful. None of them looked reverent. And when people are successful by some means in a hunt like that, and there's this big trophy thing, and they don't even use the meat, I don't know the word for it. Irreverent doesn't cover it. But there are people that hunt like that. They hunt for the trophy, not for the meat. If you're hunting with your heart and you're hunting for the meat, and you bless the meat, then I bless your hunting. Well, I just think, zooming out and looking at the big picture though, you know at Safeway, at the very end of the meat section, where they put all the stuff that doesn't sell, and if it doesn't sell that day, it goes out in the bin? That's irreverent. A lot of animals died to have their flesh rotting in a garbage bin, not even feeding the vultures. That's just so wrong. So wrong. I don't have an answer, but I certainly have that observation, and I have that judgment, and I have that opinion, and I'll own it. Another little pet peeve of mine is I was following a truck the other day, and it hit a deer. And I watched the deer writhing on the side of the road as I drove by. And I thought to stop and put it out of its misery, but I was really angry that this person didn't stop. And so I chased him down, flashing my lights, and I pulled him over and I said, "Are you going to go finish that deer, or do I have to do it?" I had a sharp enough pocket knife that I could have. But you don't leave an animal to suffer. You wouldn't leave a dog to suffer. At least I hope you wouldn't. And you shouldn't leave a deer to suffer on the side of the road. I guess I made the assumption that where I live, most men of a certain age and that drive maybe a type of truck are at least going to have what it takes to go and end an animal's life that they basically killed. All these things are about being in right relationship to me as well. If you get real quiet before you go hunting, the night before you go hunting, and you imagine that somewhere in between a dream sequence from a Native American movie where the eagle calls and flies over, and your Google Earth, somewhere in between those, you can imagine flying over your hunt area, your unit, and look for the deer with your imagination. If with your heart you can feel that you're part of the earth, and that for whatever your reasons, like hunger, needing to connect by eating deer meat, or having that experience, if you can humbly connect and ask and use your sight and drop into that quiet spot, you'll find your deer and you'll know where they are the next day. In my mind, hunting isn't so much a sport as it is meditation, a way to be part of the earth.